It was just another quiet evening when she saw him, mud-caked fur, hollow eyes, and a limp in his step. A German shepherd, alone and hungry, standing by her fence like he didn't belong to this world. Most people would have shut the door. But not her. With trembling hands and a heart far too soft for her own good, she stepped outside with a bowl of leftovers. Just one kind act. She thought that was all it was. But what she didn't know was, that moment would spark a chain of events that would change her life forever. Margaret had lived alone ever since her husband passed away 5 years ago. The small cottage on the edge of town felt even quieter these days. The creaking floorboards, the ticking of the old wall clock, and the rustle of trees outside were now her constant companions. She had grown used to solitude, not by choice, but by time. Her children lived in different states, busy with lives of their own. Most days, she passed the time tending to her tiny garden, knitting on the porch, or feeding the birds that flocked to her window. There was a softness in her that hadn't hardened with age. She still waved at strangers, still left a bowl of water outside for the squirrels, still believed that kindness mattered, even when no one was watching. Deep down, a part of her missed being needed. Missed the warmth of someone, anyone, depending on her. But she had learned to find peace in the little things. So, when she saw the German shepherd standing outside her gate that evening, something stirred in her. It wasn't just pity, it was instinct. A quiet, gentle voice inside her whispered, "Help him." And without hesitation, she listened. The dog stood still as a statue, watching her every move. His fur was matted with dirt, his ribs faintly visible beneath his coat. But his eyes, deep, amber, and strangely human, held something more than hunger. They held a story. Margaret moved slowly, careful not to startle him. She returned with a bowl of warm chicken and rice left over from dinner. As she gently placed it near the gate, the dog didn't lunge or bark. He simply looked at her, then at the food, then back at her, as if asking permission. When he finally stepped forward and began to eat, she noticed how cautious he was. Every bite was slow, deliberate, like he wasn't used to kindness. She sat on the porch, watching silently, her hands folded in her lap. "Poor thing," she whispered. "Where did you come from?" The dog didn't respond, of course, but his ears perked up slightly at her voice. For a few minutes, time felt suspended, the breeze, the setting sun, and the quiet between two lonely souls. When the bowl was empty, the German shepherd gave her one long, lingering glance. Then, without a sound, he turned, and walked back into the shadows. Margaret remained seated on the porch, her eyes following the dog as he disappeared down the quiet road. She didn't know where he was going, or if he'd ever come back. But something about his calm, almost purposeful walk made her wonder if this wasn't their last meeting. She gathered the empty bowl and sighed, brushing a tear from her cheek she hadn't realized was there. "Be safe," she whispered into the still evening air, half hoping he'd hear it. Inside, the house felt a little emptier than usual. Funny, she thought. How a creature she'd just met could leave such a hollow space behind. That night, she left the porch light on a little longer, just in case. And by morning, she had almost convinced herself that the encounter was a fleeting one. A kind gesture to a passing stray. Nothing more. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The next morning, as the sun spilled golden light across her porch, Margaret opened the door to water her plants, and froze. There he was. The same German shepherd, sitting patiently at the edge of her garden path, just as calm as before. But this time, he wasn't alone. From behind a nearby bush, a small, timid puppy peeked out, ears drooping, eyes wide and unsure. The larger dog looked back at it, then forward at Margaret, as if to say, "It's safe. You can trust her." Margaret's hand flew to her chest. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. Slowly, the puppy stepped forward, clumsy on its paws, still uncertain. The shepherd stood and gave it a gentle nudge. The message was clear. He had brought the little one here for help. Margaret knelt down with tears in her eyes. "You brought a friend," she said softly. "Or maybe, your family." Margaret opened her arms wide, motioning gently for them to come closer. The puppy hesitated, then slowly waddled forward, sniffing the air with innocent curiosity. The German shepherd followed closely behind, his eyes locked on Margaret, not with fear, but with a kind of quiet trust. It was as if he knew this was the right place. She brought them inside, clearing a corner in the kitchen and laying down old towels as makeshift beds. The puppy curled up instantly, exhausted. The shepherd sat beside him, alert but calm, his body between the door and the tiny pup, always protecting. Margaret watched in awe, a soft smile tugging at her lips. It was clear now, this dog hadn't been wandering aimlessly. He had a purpose. He had someone to protect. And somehow, he had chosen her to help him do it. Later that day, she took a closer look at the puppy, thin, undernourished, with a small scar across one paw. The shepherd must have been caring for him alone, scavenging for food, guarding him through the night. The thought made her chest ache. She ran her fingers gently through the big dog's fur. "You're not just any stray, are you?" she whispered. "You're a guardian." He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for the briefest moment of peace. In that simple gesture, Margaret felt something shift. This wasn't just an act of rescue. It was a meeting of souls, each one carrying pain, each one longing for a little bit of hope. Days turned into a week, and Margaret's home, once so still and silent, now pulsed with life. The puppy, whom she named Oliver, had begun to bounce around the house with playful energy, chewing on slippers and chasing sunbeams. The German shepherd, now called Max, remained his quiet guardian, always nearby, always watching. But something else had changed too. Margaret felt it every morning when she opened her eyes to the sound of tiny paws tapping across the floor. She felt it in the warmth of their presence, in the laughter that had returned to her voice. She began talking to her neighbors again, waving to children on bikes, even baking a little extra to share with the mailman. There was a spark in her that hadn't burned in years. One afternoon, as she sat on the porch with a warm cup of tea and both dogs lying at her feet, she realized this wasn't just about saving them. They had saved her too. The loneliness, the weight of grief, the silence, it had all been softened by fur, paws, and the wordless kind of love only animals can offer. She looked down at Max. "I think you knew I needed this, even before I did." One crisp morning, Margaret awoke to find Max sitting by the front door, something clutched gently in his mouth. Curious, she walked over, and he placed it at her feet, a small, weathered locket, its chain tangled and worn with time. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Inside was a faded photo of a young boy hugging Max as a puppy. Tears welled in her eyes. This wasn't just a dog who had wandered into her life. He had once belonged to someone. Someone he had lost. She knelt beside him, holding his face in her hands. "You carried that memory all this time?" Max closed his eyes, pressing his head gently against her chest. In that moment, Margaret understood. He hadn't just come looking for food or shelter. He had come to grieve. And somehow, in finding her, he found a way to heal too. Some say animals don't feel the way we do, but Margaret knew better. She saw it in Max's eyes, in the way he protected, remembered, and loved. What began as a simple act of kindness became a shared journey of healing between two broken hearts. In giving him food, she gave him trust. In bringing her the locket, he gave her truth. Sometimes, the souls we rescue are the ones sent to rescue us. And in a quiet house once filled with silence, there was now warmth, laughter, and the steady rhythm of paws against hardwood floors. Love had returned, unexpected and unconditional.